Hey everybody, how's it going? Today I'm reviewing Summer of Night by Dan Simmons. I'll do my best to have the cover on the screen for you to see. I read this on an e-reader, of course, so I don't have a physical book to hold up, so I hope this will do. Before I get into the review, I'm going to briefly talk about how I came upon Simmons as an author, because I don't think I've ever reviewed a book of his on this channel. So if you just want to skip to the review, I'll put a timestamp somewhere. I don't want to waste your time, right? No spoilers, of course. I don't do spoilers really on this channel. So basically, to make a long story short, I had finished reading It by Stephen King for like the second time. I love King. I grew up reading him. I love It. It's a very fun book. And I wanted to look for something similar, so people recommended this. I thought, what the hell? I went to go download it at the time from a library app on my Kindle, and it wasn't available. So I just said, I'm just going to download The Terror. It's the only other book of his that they have. And I went camping, totally disconnected from tech, no internet, of course, anything like that. Great place to read. And I just sat down, no knowledge of The Terror, and started reading. And I thought, oh my God, this is really good. This guy can write his ass off. I loved it. Now, I started a job soon after that required a lot of my time. The Terror is a very long book, so I wanted to give it my full attention, so I stopped reading it. I wanted to cherish that experience. And for whatever reason, I never got back to Simmons. So anyways, like I said, long story short, or long story long, recently I was like, yeah, I got to read Simmons again. I want to read The Terror, but I think I'm going to start with Summer of Night. So this book came out in 1991, and it is the first book in Simmons' so-called Seasons of Horror. I believe it's called the Seasons of Horror series. There's 4 books. They're kind of loosely related. I think maybe one of them is a direct sequel, but they kind of have characters from the books crossover and whatnot. And I think he does do that in some of his other novels, like King does. And we'll get to the King comparison, don't worry. But yeah, this is basically a gothic horror coming-of-age novel. It is set in 1960, or the 1960s, but I believe 1960 in Elm Haven, Illinois. So a kind of small, sort of close-knit Midwestern town. And it is a pretty traditional coming-of-age, if you want to call it kids on bikes story. I think that's a really good descriptor for these kinds of stories. So you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. You know that it's going to be a group of young kids. In this case, they're like 11 going on 12. They're pretty young adolescent kids that discover some sort of horror in their town, some dark secret that they must band together to fight. In the case of this story, these kids go to a very, very old school called Old Central, and they begin their summer vacation when this book takes place, and the school gets closed down for good. And that's where some of the gothic horror that I don't see people talk about as much come into play here. The book has a sort of like brooding, haunting feeling that would not be out of place in a Shirley Jackson novel, especially the way the book unfolds. Maybe not exactly, but it definitely at times reminded me of Jackson and some of her more gothic entries, especially the opening chapter, which is like a clear homage to Shirley Jackson. But yeah, that's basically the setup. One of their friends goes missing, and they start investigating, and a lot of creepy stuff starts happening. That's the general gist of the book. Like I said, the characters in this book are prepubescent adolescent kids, and frankly, they're very, very enjoyable to read. There's about 5 or so kids in here, and I just really like the way that Simmons wrote them. He doesn't quite go extremely deep into their backstories, like taking time to go to each one, but he does give them all fleshed out backstories. And this is a book, and this is a problem I have sometimes with coming of age books of this nature, where it can be a little hard to separate the kids. They sort of become one homogenous sort of character, if you will. And in here, each kid is very distinct. They all serve a sort of trope, if you will. You have the like rapscallion character, you have the brains, you have the daring one, you have the academic kid, basically, the researcher, if you will. But they're very distinctive, and I found myself really invested in these characters. And Simmons does a very good job at just character development in general and balancing that with the more terrifying aspects of the book and also making the book fun to read. So, with that being said, the horror in this book is very well done. There's a sort of pervasive sense of creeping dread in here. This is the kind of book where the horror is very much not, quick paced, spooky sorts of, scares, jump scares almost, if you will, literary jump scares, I tend to call them, where they're just like set pieces of a crazy monster or something. There's a little bit of that, but this book takes more of an atmospheric route and really takes the time to build, like I said, this just extreme sense of dread. And the scares start to happen, and are a little freaky, but then they really start to pan out. And there are moments where there are some really freaky ass moments in this book. And when the horror really hits in this book, it hits. There are some intense moments in here, violent and gory. It's not an overly gory book, but when they hit, they're strong. But just in general, this book has just a dreadful feeling to it. That feeling of being helpless, the nightmarish sort of feel of being totally alone and helpless. Like I said, it's just very good in this book. He plays around with some other styles of horror as well, like body horror, done very well, and cosmic horror. We'll get to King in a second, which King doesn't but tremendously well done here. Just giving you enough, like as I think cosmic horror should be done. Just letting you see barely enough, but just enough to be like, what the hell was that? So the horror in here is very well done. I probably am repeating myself, but it's not that kind of quick-paced, fun horror. It's more something that really gets under your skin, especially with the particular things that he plays on in here. A lot of times in coming-of-age novels, you have the, I guess a loss of innocence, right? And you get that in here as well. But I like that while there's some fantastical elements in here, supernatural horror, of course. It's a horror novel. It's not, you have to suspend your disbelief. Some of the horror in here, I found it interesting how he made it more relatable. Like fears of the dark, He also plays around with some unique things like smell that I thought was really cool and creative. And just interesting, I don't even know what you would call them, literary devices like, this won't mean anything to you if you haven't read it, but if you have, the rendering truck, using just certain things as devices to scare you that are just, anytime they pop up, you're like, oh shit, it's not like a spooky jump in the night kind of thing, or bump in the night, whatever, but just like, when certain things pop up in this book, you get freaked out just as the kids would. To quickly talk about it, because of course a lot of people compare this to that, I think clearly Simmons read it. I don't think that's probably even debatable. Like, the treatment of the plot is very similar. Simmons and King, I don't know if they're friends, but they know each other's stuff. King speaks very highly of Simmons, as do a lot of authors, but there's a definite comparison to be made there, and I think that you could probably tell just by what I've said so far. I think that if you like it, you should check this out for another sort of coming-of-age horror novel. But I think that if you go into this book expecting another It, you will probably be disappointed, because this is not that. This is Summer of Night, and it is it. I think if you want to read it, you should read it. That's a lot of its. But this is distinctly its own thing. And while I think Simmons is a very chameleon-esque writer, he writes in a lot of different genres. I think he's probably best known for the Hyperion Cantos, which is sci-fi. He's written historical fiction and thrillers. I just think he's a good writer overall. Frankly, I think he's a much better writer than King. Like I said in the beginning, I love Stephen King, but Simmons is just a better writer. I think his prose is better, his characterization is better, and the way that he lays things out. I just think he's, in general, just a great storyteller. So when people comment on him and say he writes in all these styles, I think it's less that he's trying to write in a particular style and just that he is a very good storyteller, and that whatever style he goes to write in, his storytelling ability and writing ability just comes through. Also, not to mention, he does tend to do meticulous research for his books. But yeah, if you're expecting, and I think I've made this very clear, but just to reiterate, if you're expecting a quick paced, fun book, now granted, it is like 1,100 pages and is not a short read, but it's very much like a fun, spooky kind of read. And this book takes its time. It is quite slow paced. Like, I don't think anything particularly scary happens for quite a while in this book. And even when the scares start to happen, they're not terrifying. And he's just planting the seeds. He's basically sowing this sense of dread in you. And it's the kind of book where, also from the plot, it almost like mirrors the way the characters are feeling, pardon me, where they're trying to figure out what the fuck is going on in this town. Like, what is going on? They don't know, and you don't know. Now, it's not confusing or cryptic. This is a pretty easy reading book. It's very accessible, but it's a slow book. It's one where it's like a puzzle you're piecing together. And the way that he plants these seeds and the fear starts to grow throughout the book, and also just he trusts the reader's intelligence at times, where he'll leave a plot point or a character or something and then come back to it quite a bit later. And it's just very well written so that not to, oh, I forgot about that. But he spaces it out just enough to where you start to forget about something. And when it comes back, you almost feel smart, right? To like, oh, I remember that. And these points really hit. And I think that's just the mark of a very good writer. So, yeah, overall, like, this is a really, really excellently written, fun, enjoyable, easy reading, scary, coming of age gothic horror novel. I don't think it's for people that like really slower paced stuff. I think that actually the plot is slow paced, but I think overall this is quite a snappy read in the sense that there's always something happening. I really never felt a lull in the book. Some people read horror just for the scares. Like, they ignore everything else but the scares. And I think if you're one of those readers, then you might have issues with this. But overall, like, this is a great book. And especially as the book nears its final act, the pace picks up quite a bit. It gets very action filled towards the end and has a really fun, crazy ending. And I think that it really picks up really good. I really only have one negative thing to say about this book, in that I found there's only one chapter that was very exposition heavy, almost like an info dump. And he never really did that in this book, but there was one chapter where I was like, this is not hitting the way it should, Now, granted, he did it in a creative way, but that was my only negative of the book, really. I guess in some sense, and I do see other people talk about this, the child characters, maybe are not written. I think they're written quite well, actually. And again, not to make this a comparison video, but I do think they're better written than Stephen King's child characters, particularly in It. But they do have a little bit more of a mature sense about them. You got kids in here, like I said, they're 11. You got kids in here smoking cigarettes and fucking joyriding cars and shooting guns and stuff. It's awesome. But at times it's like they almost feel a little bit more mature, like 14, 15-year-olds. But at the same time, this is 1960 in the Midwest. It was a very different time then. And also, much like King, they're about the same age as authors. I think Simmons was born in 48. They grew up around this time period. So Simmons, and I know for a fact that Simmons based a lot of the characters on himself, his brother, people he knew. So, you get an insight into that time period, even though I wasn't born there. But even as a kid from the 90s, like, we didn't have internet growing up, or it was just becoming a thing, we spent a lot of time outside during the summer. We would spend time, at night walking the streets, the streets lit by the sodium vapor lights and everything, and that amber glow. And this book definitely captures that, as well as like weather elements and stuff. There goes the you saw enough of that, but like weather elements like storms and stuff and wind, and it just gives a great atmosphere overall. So I'm going on a little bit too long about this. I think we'll wrap it up, but overall, Summer of Night, it was a great read. If you want a nice slow burn, get under your skin, scary, fun book, definitely check it out. I will be back with something else. I'm also reading Song of Kali by Simmons. I really enjoyed this, and I want to read his other stuff. So if you've read this, let me know what you think. If you've read Song of Kali, let me know what you think. I'll be back with that. It's a pretty short book. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Peace out. Have a great day.